worked with new materials and techniques to produce structures and buildings that were elegant, economic, and structurally efficient. Daiste was born in Artigas, a small town in northern part of Uruguay. He studied engineering at the University of Republic in capital city of Montevideo. This city at the time was growing culturally and economically. He made his reputation by building a range of structures from silos, factory sheds, markets, and churches, most of them in his country, and all of exceptional elegance. A particular innovation was his Gaussian vault, a thin shell structure for roofs in single thickness brick that derives its stiffness and strength from a double curvature catenary arch form that resists buckling failure. The technique that he developed were at world that time, capitalizing on his revolutionary approach to building with reinforced masonry, aesthetically and economically. Change the slide. Hello. Did the slide change for all of you?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
changed, but Sahid, could you just talk a little slowly because इतना speed में मत बोलो.
all right, all right. So
Okay.
this is a timeline we got from the internet, which shows various structures built in various years by the engineer, and the this shows the particular roof styles he used in most of his structures, which were unique in its own way. Um, in the next slide. This is a timeline we made for our PPT. So this shows his life in a shell, like he was from Montevideo, and for 3 years, next 3 years, he worked as an engineer at Christian and Nielsen Company. And from 1953 to 1973, he was also a professor, which and teached students about large scale structures and bridges. During this time of teaching, he also established his own firm in 1956, and from there on, he built a lot of unique structures like Atlantida Church in 1958 and so on. He was deceased in the year 2000. So the material he used he used brick almost exclusively as the primary structural material for his projects. Bricks are indigenous materials, and bricks also had advantages over concrete, which were they were lighter, hence less reinforcement and formwork were required. In a wall, 80-90% of the material is already hardened, and hygroscopic nature of the brick draws water from the mortar, causing the wall to stiffen rapidly, and hence the formwork can when compared to concrete. Brickwork uses cement than concrete stages well. They use a variety of different types of bricks, from solid handmade to hollow clay pots, depending on the requirement of his structure. So this is the first building we are looking at. It is known as the Church San Pedro. In 1967, a fire occurred in the original wooden ceiling of this place, surviving historical elements of the original architecture. The engineer then designed a new reinforced brick roof, which made the structure columnless. The rose window is a surprising element which constitutes a brick masonry, and it is made up of five concentric brick rings in an irregular hexagon. Here are some of his comments, his personal comments on the skylight, which he window which unloaded the bell tower. So he made a reinforced concrete portico that would carry the weight of the bell tower to the old walls, so as to build something in between them. To find a solution, it is necessary to know that brick, mortar, and iron form a unit as valid as reinforced concrete. So the width of the joints, coatings, etc., can be then studied, but the construction proves their viability. The same could be done in reinforced concrete, but it would be more difficult and expensive. Introducing ceramic pieces into the structure is not new at that time, but the skylight which he made was made up of ceramic, iron, and mortar. The calculation he describes is simple, irregular for various reasons the weight on the lower spokes. So there are these tension wires which run through these frames, and he says that the tension wire goes under compression on the lower part and under tension on the upper part, upper half of the frames. So these are some images. One shows the previous structure and then how it looks now. So I made some basic sketches of the building to understand it more properly and the load transfer. So the building covers an area of 800 square meters, and it has it varies heights everywhere. Like somewhere it's 4 meter till 13.7 meters in height, and the apse space is of 20 meters in height. So the left diagram shows the how the load used to get transferred uh, when it was made up of those wooden posts and trusses. And also how the how he managed to occupy get this free space within the whole structure.
Uh, the next part we are looking at is the Gaussian vault, one of the innovations that the engineer had done. So the Gaussian vault is basically a double curve geometry. It is based on the shape is based on the catenary, resulting in mainly axial compressive forces, whereas most thin wide span roofs have been built using concrete. Yes, they used brick. And unlike traditional masonry vaults, there are only one brick layer in thickness. There is no separate structure required for this structure of the roof. So in the first image, we can see how the continuous Gaussian vault takes shape, and the other one shows the non-continuous vault. And this third picture shows how the catenary curves are taken into consideration while he designed the Gaussian vault. So there are two different methods of prototyping this vault that he used. So the first phase is to understand the development of scale prototypes is through rapid prototyping. The process of this methodology is quite simple and not necessarily unique. The surface of the Gaussian vault is thickened by a depth. As a solid digital model, the form is exported into a consistent stereolithography a file that is used for the 3D printing, and where this solid model is represented as a triangular mesh, and then it is 3D printed. So these are the stages which are used for the development of the digital model. This is one picture that shows how this geometry of the surface is designed, where two sides of the two edges of the Gaussian vault are straight lines, and these quaternary curves are then made to form a surface of this shape. The second method is surface prototyping. This method involves experimentation with surface geometry using planar strips. So the picture that we saw last time, this is more related to the surface prototyping. The smooth curvature of the Gaussian surface is developed into a planar polygon mesh. To achieve this, the smooth surface is developed using a grid of points applied across the surface geometry. This point grid is then joined together to produce a polygon mesh. Each band of the polygon mesh is then unfolded into a triangular planar strip. Two planar strips were developed in the lateral and longitudinal direction of the surface geometry to facilitate an accurate, discrete representation of the smooth surface. This was achieved by switching the skin direction of the surface such that the paths became profiles and profiles became paths. The fabrication of the planar strips involved two distinct sets of vector lines, a set of lines that are required to cut and a set of vector lines that are required to be engraved. With the use of a device such as a laser cutter, each set of vector lines could be distinguished and allow the production of individual planar strips. As the surface geometry is to be produced in a set of planar strips, the material constraints are different to the previous method of solid rapid prototyping. Thin cardboard paper can be used to fold and weave the planar strips together into a 3D form. So this is how the form in a prototype is developed. Then we tried developing a prototype using dough, where we kept a wire mesh. We folded a wire mesh into the shape of those quaternary curves approximately, and then cladded it with dough and then let it dry. And when we removed the um wire mesh, it kind of took a similar shape. There are various projects where Gaussian vault is used. There are some warehouses, and this is one of the prominent projects, that is Don Bosco Gymnasium. And the span of the roof is 25 meters, whereas in the warehouse it also ranges up to 50 meters.
So the next thing we focused was the freestanding vaults built by DST. So the freestanding vault is a single curvature vault that requires a relatively simple formwork to construct, and the vertical supports are kept less. And DST envisioned these walls to float above the wall and having very less vertical supports, as you can see in this projects right here. The first one is a Refresco del Noitra and a double cantilever freestanding vault on a on two columns arranged in a vertical in a straight line. And the second one is the yeah, and the second one is the Salto bus station in Uruguay again, where a series of walls are supported on a single strip of vertical columns. Next. Yeah. So earlier, it was used to believe that walls should be supported on end walls or stiff arches to avoid unnecessarily and costly buttresses or interfering tie rods. But next. But in BS's application, it is seen that uh, uh, he has tried something different and only wanted to support the entire vault onto a single strip of vertical columns and give it a light floating element as in the buildings. So he has used these kind of walls in many large scale workshops, factories, and warehouses. And the cross section, as you can see in this diagram, is mainly a catenary curve, and the freestanding barrel is used in shorter transverse spans between the springings up to 10 to 12 meters with a span to rise ratio not greater than 4. So it is deeper than the Gaussian wall that we saw earlier, but and it is due to this greater depth of the vault and the shorter span which greatly reduces the stresses in the brickwork due to the self weight. and therefore the risk of the buckling is not significant, and the vault adopts a simple curvature between springs. So we understood how the load transfer occurs in such type of vault, and because he used the depth of the cross section and made the vault self-supporting, which is capable of spanning long distances between supports, and so he avoids the use of uh, uh, the tie rods between, and also the thrust from the arcing action of the vault is taken care by the folded horizontal edge beams, which transfer the load to the concrete buttressed columns. And also he creates a feeling of lightness to his structure by keeping the walls at a lower height than the roof, and this vault is capable to span 35 meters between vertical supports and can cantilever up to 15 meters, and in some cases the walls are used simple as canopies and with no vertical enclosure and sit rather precariously as double cantilevers on single set of columns. So we focus on the sequence of construction in walls. So firstly, the construction of the supporting column takes place, and there are reinforcements projecting out of it, to which there's formwork on which the bricks are laid in stack bonded manner. Joints typically 20 millimeters wide. Then third comes the longitudinal and transverse reinforcements. 5 to 6 millimeters in diameter is placed in the joints, over which there's a cement sand mix poured. The brick absorbs moisture from the mortar and it starts to stiffen almost immediately. The formwork is usually struck the following day, depending on the weather conditions. The edge beam is propped both vertically and horizontally. As the formwork is stripped, the self weight of the vault is transferred to the props by the action of catenary arch. Then the formwork is then moved to the next section, and usually the formwork sits on steel rails, and it is raised and lowered on mechanically driven jacks. Great care is taken in aligning the formwork to the previous section of the wall to facilitate continuity of the reinforcement and the visual integrity of the soffit of the wall, usually left as exposed brickwork. Uh, yeah, next. So after construction of the walls, he really focuses on pre-stressing the wall so that it can take it can counterattack the stresses that occur when they are subject to loading. So pre-stressing is done along the crown of the vault, and also applied on the junction of the edge beam and the vault, or the valley between the walls. Next slide. So this shows the pre-stressing along the crown of the vault. So he has developed a method of using welded loops of steel, which are placed on the crown of the vault and anchored using steel reinforcements bonded into the vault at each end of the vault. And between these ends, the loops are free to move. Pre-stress is produced by pinching the wires together at the midpoint of the loops and stretching them into a figure of 8. This tension in the wire pre-compresses the vault. The length of the roofs and the distance between the long sides determine the level of pre-stress. Once the wires achieve the required extension, they are held in position by metal clamps. The wires are then covered by thin concrete screed. And by adopting this technique, the benefits that come along are the pre-stress forces is distributed over a large area at the anchorage, avoiding high local stresses. The pre-stress is held within the thickness of the topping of the vault. The pre-stress is applied using a very simple jack without hydraulics, which can tension a number of wires simultaneously. So the diagram here shows before pre-stressing and after pre-stressing what the condition of the crown is. So again, pre-stressing is also done at the edge, but because the same system is not adopted here. Here he uses overlapping loops of pre-stressing steel with their ends anchored firmly into the walls. And again, he has developed a special jack, which is here seen in the diagrams. So this particular project is Fagarkola, where it was constructed in 1992, and the longest internal span is about 24 meters, and the vault cantilevers over 12 meters at each end. The transfer span between springing points is also around 12 meters, and the rise of the vault is 4 meters, keeping the span to rise ratio of 3. The vault is again pre-stressed over the crown and at the edges, and the thickness of the vault is kept around 100 millimeters, comprising of a rectangular extruded hollow clay unit of 70 and along on which 30 millimeter of sand cement topping is provided, and the maximum width of the edge beam is 2 meters. Typical of many of the DST's building, there is clear visual separation of the roof from the walls, so that the structure can be seen lighter. The roof is also supported on series of concrete columns independent of the enclosing walls. The space between the underside of the walls and the roof is enclosed using glazing, particularly noticeable at the gable to clearly show that the walls offer no support to the roof.
Yeah, so the next project that we looked over was the Cristo Obrero Church, which is in Atlantida. It is also known as the Atlantida Church. Its area is 33 meters by 16 meters and built in the 1958. This project combines two of the DST's greatest structural inventions, which was the continuous gation walls and vertical rule surfaces. So this is a parish church which serves a large rural area with, and it has a seating capacity of 300 people. And the church consists of a main building which is at the center in this image. On the left hand side, that is an entrance to the circular baptistry, which is underground and which is a separate structure. And on the right hand side, that is the bell tower. The walls and roof, they together form a double curved shell, and the material he used was all the floor walls and the roof. It's all made up of brick, reinforced where necessary, and left unplastered. Next slide. So the walls, they have a height of 7 meters, and their thickness is 300 even all around. And the reinforcement, there was the steel wires used in the walls to were 1/1/8 of an inch, and the cavities were filled with waterproof mortar. And the walls are formed by conoidal surfaces straight on the ground and undulating at the top. Each wave consists of a central segment of a parabola and two half segments. And the wall is crowned by a beam, a very thin beam, which is constructed of brick and concrete mixed together. And the beam forms eaves and takes the thrust of the wall. So in this sketch over here, so that is how we analyzed how the beam actually helps in stabilizing the wall. Next. Yeah. So this on the bottom, this series of these circles and the curves joining their edges is how the construction is, how the form of the wall took place, how the curves of the wall took place. And in this sketch, the forces F1 and F2, they are actually over a wave. F1 is the force which is being exerted by the crest of the wave, and the F2 is the force being exerted by the trough. So we analyzed that both these forces, F1 and F2, they actually the resultant of these two forces stabilizes one complete wave, and thus the entire wall. And we also made a model of the I also made a model of the wall, but the wall is not stable on its own. The roof and the beams, they also they take the thrust of the wall, and thus they stabilize the wall. So initially, when the wall was being built, the formwork and the support wasn't taken off immediately after the construction of the wall was done. But after the roof and the beams were laid, and then the wall got stabilized. Next slide. Yeah, so this is a detail at the eaves. At some places, the eave, it is protruding a little more, and at other places it's protruding a little less. Next. So the roof. Now the roof has a mean span of 16 meters, and its thickness is just 110 mm. It's very thin and appears to be very light, and it's a Gaussian walled roof. So, and the rise of the roof varies between 70 mm to 1475 mm. So the roof is a continuous Gaussian walled structure with an aperture in the center, so that light comes in, and the wave valley is almost horizontal, and the tensors, that they are anchored to the beam, the eaves beam at the top of the wall, and they also help in absorbing the thrust of the wall. So together, the vault forms a shell with two hinges, which has great transversal rigidity, and the union between the rolling surfaces of the roof and the walls introduce a particular instability that causes strange effect of the layers of the brick inside when a person looks at it from the inside. So in these sketches, we analyzed how a normal roof with a typical roof would take the load. How a typical yeah. So over there, when the edges are very sharp and the walls are perpendicular to the roof, that is how they take load. However, in this case, the load is evenly distributed, and the slant and the undulating surface of the wa- of the walls, it is actually stabilized by the load which is coming onto it from the eaves beam and the roof, and that is how it gets stabilized. Next. And that is how the load transfer actually takes place on the entire structure. So the foundation is it consists of closely spaced 6 inches piles. We couldn't gather much information on that, so it is not shown in this sketch. The black arrows, they show how the flow of compression takes place on the vault roof, as Vatsal had explained earlier, and the red arrows along the undulations of the roofs on the edges, they show the flow of the traction. The red lines in between in the valleys, they show the traction cable, and the green line, it shows the edge locks where after which point the beam is protruding. Next. Yeah, so the bell tower is very high. It's actually 15 meters high, and even after so many years, it hasn't shown any bend or any anomaly in the structure. It has a cylindrical form, and it was constructed of wholly reinforced brick, built without any scaffolding, and it has prefabricated steps arranged spirally, cantilevered from the outer wall. So in this sketch we analyzed how why the bell tower is so stable even after so many years. So actually there are a lot of fenestrations on the walls which help in resisting the wind load, and thus providing structural stability against it. Yeah. Yes, and these are the references, the websites we provide. Thank you.
Yeah, any questions, anybody?
No one found anything interesting?
Can you pull up the slide, the first slide with the barrel walls that you had? Sahil or someone? The one with the red color diagram.
This one?
There was one with the red diagram with red highlights.
Okay.
Is it 8?
This one, yeah.
Double So those openings are made for a particular reason in terms of load transfer, or just to reduce the weight.
The openings in this part of the roof, are you talking about these?
Yeah, the openings, or am I just misreading the diagram?
No, actually those are openings, but they aren't made for a structural purpose, but for ventilation. For example, if we look at this structure in the gym that they've made, the basketball court, so you can see how light is entering through that part of the roof.
Right. So it acts more like an arcade than an actual, like a mix of an arcade and a barrel wall, does it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Atharva had a question.
Yeah, can you just go to the next slide, 14th one? Yeah, so like I didn't understand these freestanding walls about uh, yeah, so like uh, how the cantilever really works, that I didn't understand.
Yeah, Sahil, can you go to the 17th slide? It would be easier. Yeah, so Atharva, here, can you see the sections through the Saldo bus station?
Yeah.
Yeah, so here what he has done, he has used a single buttressed concrete column, which is very big, and to which a large edge beam is supported, and onto which there is a light brick vault, which is catenary in nature. So that transfers the load equally to the edge beam, and which transfers again the load to the vertical buttressed column.
Okay. Yeah, and it's like it's equal on both sides. In the picture, it looked like it's pretty offsetted from
No,
the
no, it's
center. So
equal.
I was
It's equal, and mainly he has achieved this by keeping the rise to span ratio in mind, and not getting it greater to 4.
okay.
If
Thanks.
you go to the previous slide, where he's using the butterfly vault for over a petrol station or something, it is not equally spaced. It is off center. Go to the previous one. Yeah. This one here, the one freestanding may the picture that you show on the left side, that is not center, right? That's
Yeah,
off center.
yeah. That's why I was asking. Ki,
Yeah, this is off centered, right? It is meant. I think it's for a petrol station or something like that. Yeah. How does this work? So, okay. So does somebody else have a question here? Nobody else has any question. Okay, yeah, just explain how do you think this has been supported? Yeah, Vatsal, go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying that the concept that he used was similar in all of the vaulted structures that he used, but here I think there is only two double cantilever freestanding wall, he has achieved the irregular cantilevers on both ends.
Yeah, does that really, have you really, do you think you have answered my question?
Uh,
Okay, you four of you, when you were researching about his work, what did you feel when you discovered his work? What kind of questions did you have in your mind?
We basically uh, before all the research began, when we just were looking at some of his projects and the pictures, we were really shocked because the kind of cantilevers and the weightlessness in his structures, it was very it was very different, and at that time in that year, and how he did all those calculations, or was it intuitive, or how he could have reduced that. So
Correct. So I'm wondering if your friends here have the same feeling now that you have showed them the pictures and everything. Are they equally blown away? And if you have really created that effect, and if you have justified the works, showing off of the works of a great person. I want to know if you have justified and if you have done a great effort in doing that. What do you think, Sahil?
I think we have tried to pay attention to the technical part of the uh, structure that he tried to build.
I think you I don't know. I don't think you have really sort of like did a postmortem analysis of how the structural integrity is working, and I don't think you've really, in the core of the core, understood how these structures are standing. You have not understood how the formwork is made. I don't know if you have really understood how the weight load transfer is happening. Um, Okay, there are you have put in the work, but having researched all this, do you feel confident that you have understood all of it? It's a question I have for you. Bolo bolo. I mean, we have others also presenting today.
Yeah, hi, Rajita. I would like to say here that we have understood what was there on the internet, because much of it wasn't really there, and we were very limited to certain information that the PDFs could offer, and certain technical terms that we couldn't understand, and the mathematical equations were there in the PDF, but we couldn't understand and grasp the total part of it. But we had discussions and debates on how it is supporting, and what is the load transfer diagrams and all. So some part of it is speculating stuff, but we have really taken effort on trying to understand what and how the structure is built.
We have a book dedicated to Eladio in the library. You could have one of you could have just gone to the library or asked to get some PDFs made and sent it to you or something like that. So we have a whole thick fat book on his works in the library. बट ठीक है सी व्हाट आई ओके आपका प्रेजेंटेशन का तो हो गया बट आई डोंट वांट एनीबडी जस्ट सिंपली शोइंग पिक्चर्स आई रियली वांट यू टू अंडरस्टैंड व्हाट इज गोइंग ऑन ओके you know don't just look at the picture and start talking about the picture. I know you've done more than that here, but you know I want you to get into the depths of how this is going to work because I want you to be influenced by the works of these great people. So if it is not doing that, then I am failing in the attempt that I am making. The reason I am asking you to learn from them is because I want you to understand, and it is a limitation we have today to be able to, I mean these are not structures that I can just you know chalo jate hain aur dekh lete hain types, you know these are not around us. These are not works that we can see. So you really have to go back in that time, go back in that place to really understand how these works were done, how the laborers worked, how the contractors and how the scaffolding was there. You know, really get into the skin of the game. I understand you worked hard and we have constraints because now you just can't go to the library and do, your limitation is whatever the internet is throwing at you. But I actually hoped that you would have done a bit more. Neeraj, you want to say something?
No, just that same thing actually. Like whenever, even if we see a window, so let us say a small window, we'll try to analyze it ki how it stands. Of course, we will find on internet ki whatever data it has, but to analyze कि how it is standing, उसके नीचे क्या है, उसके ऊपर है, उसका क्या load कैसे वो transfer कर रहा है, like self analyze it. You might be correct, you might be wrong, like so those sketches, maybe those explanation, maybe that will help you to understand more, you know. So yeah, that's one thing I think which you can work over it again. Whenever you see again this structure or this vault, let's say anything, so how it's supporting, what might happen, the location of it, like where it is, maybe America, Europe, anything, anywhere, then what kind of different situations it might face in terms of geography, and that way how it is standing, maybe I mean you won't be find complete analysis somewhere ready made, so you might have to based on your knowledge what you have till now, based on that maybe you can develop it. You can make your own theory. It might be correct, it might be wrong, but we can at least discuss, so that would help. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, I don't have anything else to ask. If unless anybody else has anything more, we can jump on to the next presentation.
Yeah, group 10.
Yeah, we are here.
Yeah, okay.
I'll start sharing my screen.
Achha. And whoever starts talking, na, just say your name and then start talking. So I'll get to know ki who all are involved and what you all are explaining. Okay.
Hi, Neeraj, can you hear me?
Yes,
yes.
we can hear you.
Yeah, this is Tejas. Yeah. So the structural engineer whose works we studied was Cecil Balmond. Next. Cecil Balmond is a Sri Lankan British engineer, designer, um, and he transcends the conventional boundaries of discipline, working in the crossover between arts and sciences. And his design approach engages in inner organizational systems, a process based on rigorous research. Balmond has spent over 40 years investigating the relationship between form and the very roots of order at the core of life. Next.
Aditi?
Yeah, sorry. This is Aditi. These are some of his artworks. The first one is the Serpentine Pavilion 2002, which was designed by Cecil Ballman, Toyo Ito, and it was completed in June 2002. It's located in London. The material used was steel, glass, and cladding. The pavilion follows an algorithm which was repeated until a continuous series of concentric squares created a intricate mesh of structure defining series of solids and voids that folded down.
This is Aishwarya. So, Serpentine Pavilion 2006, as you can see, the names are the same. So, Cecil Ballman had this series of Serpentine Pavilions in which he tried to uh, redefine what a pavilion meant. So, the 2006 one was in collaboration with Rem Koolhaas and it was completed in 2006. And it was a temporary pavilion made, and the focus of this pavilion is the cosmic egg, which was used as a canopy over the pavilion, which could be raised or lowered as according to the climate or the time of the day.
This is Manasi. Arsenal Orbit. It was designed by Cecil Balmond in collaboration with Anish Kapoor. It is located in Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, London. A fun fact about it is that Mittal was a steel company and it produced steel which was used for making this structure, and 60% of the steel used was recycled steel. And this structure also incorporates the world's largest and longest tunnel slide designed by Karsten Holler. And just like all other works of Balmond, he here also has used small panels like modules and joined them together to create a huge structure.
The Star of Caledonia. This is an ongoing project wherein he has used galvanized steels and LED lights to light up the tips. The concept here was he wanted to trace a set of curves that intersect and spiral right.
Hello, Tejas. Hello, can anyone hear me? Can everyone
Yeah,
hear
I
me?
can hear you. I can't hear Tejas though.
Okay, I'll continue from where he got disconnected then. So, the Star of Caledonia, it's an ongoing project in Scotland, and it is a sculpture that kind of traces a set of curves which have like spikes at perpendicular angles which light up because of the LED stuck on the tips. And so, as you can see, Balmond had like this artistic approach to kind of, and he kind of has this mesh of art and science to kind of bring about design solutions or to solve problems. So, one of the major features of Balmond's work is the digrid framing system. He uses this system in a lot of his structures. So the digrid framing system is basically a framework of diagonally intersecting beams of which can be of any material. In this the system, the load follows a diagonal path following gravity, and which helps to transfer lateral loads to the ground. So the transfer of lateral loads is very important in areas which have high seismic activity, and there are a lot of advantages to this system over the traditional column and beam system. One of them is that it reduces the materials required to about the material by 20%. And the and because it is a exoskeleton kind of a system, it is on the external part of the building. It kind of opens up the space inside the building, as there are no columns or beams which are in the middle. So it kind of provides an open space and open plan. So here, to kind of study this, we kind of performed a small experiment. We kind of did the orthogonal column and beam traditional system versus the digrid system. So from here we can see that like these are watchmaker sticks, and they're pretty, like we can say that they are uniform in diameter. So the length used in the perpendicular, the orthogonal system was 188 centimeters, and the one and in the digrid structure it was 172 centimeters. So you can see less, even when the volume of the uh, structure is same, the material used is lesser in the digrid system.
So on loading it, we can see in the first diagram that the columns at the corner started to buckle out and the red beam kind of gave out in the between. So that's how usually like the load transfers in our traditional system. And in the digrid structure, it's like the lateral and the vertical load kind of travels diagonally. And the failure of this was, it kind of slanted out, and that was like how it failed, and it took over more than 7 to 8 units, like more material than our usual orthogonal structure.
Yeah, so the first building by Cecil Balmond, which we kind of did a detailed study of, is the CCTV headquarters. It is it is a China Central Television headquarters. It is 243 meters tall, and it, as you can see, it is this three-dimensional loop which kind of goes on. This building was made by, as you can see, these two towers which were shaped 90 degrees at the top and the bottom, and the primary support to the structure is mostly provided by these the digrid system used in this building, the exoskeleton, which helps in the load transfer of the building. This building was done in collaboration with Arup Groups, and it was completed in 2012. So the design concept of the building, this is kind of our analysis. So we kind of saw how the form might have come into existence. So it might like an elongated pyramid where mass was subtracted in specific ways, like from here it was taken away, so like as you can see, the two L's are in opposite directions. So the first kind of chunk was cut off from the top, and the second being taken away from here, and the third from here. There we also thought that the architect took inspiration from the Mobius strip, which is a continuous uh, loop, which is one surface and one edge, one surface and one boundary as well. So there are two L-shaped structures which also come to support the cantilever on the top. So this was how we thought that the design concept might have come into existence. Then the vertical core is one of the most important aspects of this building. As you can see, there are a lot of columns here and the transfer trusses running here. The transfer trusses are used to create large open spaces and to kind of eliminate the use of a lot of columns. The transfer trusses also help to support the columns in the cantilever, as they take support from the columns which are connected to the ground. So structures, as you can see in this diagram here, especially here, as this column, the transfer trusses here are supported on these columns which are connected to the ground, and from there the cantilever is originated. So these transfer trusses help to create the base of the cantilever as well as the overhang of the entire like this entire structure here. Also because the structure has these three very strong cores, which from where like all the external facade, as we talked about, the digrid system is also connected to the central core. So it kind of helps in bringing down the load structure from there as well. So like all these cores, these strong central cores in these two tall towers helps to make the structure stable. Then the exoskeleton. So again, this is how like we think it came into place. So as the form was like decided first, and then a kind of a base 12 meter by 12 meter grid was laid on top of that, and then when they did a load study, they kind of found out where the load was being exerted because of the cantilever overhang and the angle of the towers. So they started making the grid dense in places where the load was more, so that there were more members transferring that load to the internal core to support it. And the final, like this diagram right here is like a fold out of the entire structure. Like if it was the cardboard kind of a box, if it was folded out, then the structure kind of falls in these places. So as you can see where the cantilever is there, the purple ones, like they are very densely close to each other, while as where in near the base the digrid structure is quite sparsely placed.
So as this is a massive building, there were massive loads acting on it. The vertical load consisted of gravity, dead load, live load. And as this building is also situated in seismic activity zone, they also had to consider those loads in the lateral loads. And high wind pressure also acted on this building. And majority of the load transfer happened through the digrid, that is through these diagonal members, while the internal cores took minimal amounts of gravity loads. And as it had lesser columns, the floor slabs were free, like it was more of an open plan, and floor slabs didn't take much of the load. And while constructing this, they had to assess wind diagrams of over 100 years, as Beijing max wind speed is around 11 meters per second. Next slide.
I have changed it.
Okay. So the digrid frame. This is the frame used in the CCTV headquarters. If you see the red structure, it is the main steel structure and the main, like the digrid, which takes the load. The second layer is the orthogonal frame. It is additional support. It adds the additional support. And the third layer is also a steel structure, and it is arranged in a similar fashion to that of the first structure, that is the red one. Next slide. So construction techniques. So as this is a huge skyscraper, and it is very interesting to know how exactly it was constructed. Like the overhang is located at such a height from the ground. Like how did they construct it? So they also had to take in consideration the significant amount of construction forces that would act on it. For example, that first those two leaning towers were constructed separately, and when they reached at a certain height, incremental cantilevers from each towers were kind of constructed and brought forward from each independent towers until they connected at one point.
So it is also very interesting to know that how, like, what factors were kind of taken into consideration while they were connecting this cantilever. So because of how tall it is, and because the material is mainly steel, they had, and these towers were so tall, they had to consider the wind pressure acting on these towers, causing them to bend, and the temperature variations due to the sunlight. So the connection of these overhangs to eliminate all those kind of variations was held at like 8 in the morning on a very cold winter morning, so that the temperature variations would be least, and most of the steel will be cool, and there would be less wind because it is a winter morning.
So this is like a process, like a run through to the constructional process. So first the raft foundation was established, then vertical steel columns were erected, and heavy duty cranes were used to construct the overhang. Like the platform of the overhang was constructed, and like in a diagonal manner, like in the fifth picture, in a very diagonal manner, slowly the cantilever was built, and the last stage was like fixing the exterior glass.
Also, like the transfer trusses we talked about, those form the base of the cantilever, and you can see them here, like in the bottom part here.
So the second building we studied was the Seattle Central Library. The Seattle Central Library started its construction in 1999, and it was opened to public in May 2004. It has a total area of 38,300 square feet, which includes the reading room, mixing chamber, meeting platform, living room, staff floor, children's collection, and an auditorium. It has total 11 floors plus one basement level, and its parking covers an area of 4,600 square feet. Next. Yeah, so the design concept looks like a stack of books arranged on top of each other. The main intent was to give an illusion of floating boxes with minimum load transferring members like columns and girders. The concept involves the reinvention of the library as an access point to information presented in a variety of media. It is distributed as a central spiral instead of conventional arrangement of books and other media. So it has like stable platforms and unstable platforms. The stable platforms are dedicated for specific purposes such as books, meeting rooms, and parking, and unstable platforms exist in between stable platforms, which are used for activities such as work, interactions, and play. Next. So the structural system is composed of load-bearing and seismic system. And it has a central concrete core which provides the rigidity to the whole structure. The load-bearing system consists of columns and beams which support this cantilevered or elevated platforms. And the seismic structure is for the facade, which is like lattice-like geometry, and it connects the platform to one another. Next. Soil and foundation system. The majority of site contains stiff to hard slate with fill. The fill is disturbed soil from prior excavation activity, and it is not suitable for the foundation support. The foundations which are used are spread footing foundation, and the core carries gravity loads but resists minimal lateral forces. Next.
To minimize column and girders, many columns are skewed to connect to each other in the flank. Columns at the corners were pushed back to kind of give the floating effect. The skewed columns transfer gravity loads and maximize the counterbalancing opportunities. The skewed columns create a thrust, which are then transferred to the floor diaphragm that then connect to the central core or to the other columns. In the substructure slabs, thrust is taken by extra reinforcing steel. Perimeter trusses resist lateral loads and transfer gravity loads to the ground.
And as you can see here, again, the external skeleton is used to take lateral support, like the one in the CCTV building as well.
So the facade consists of the seismic grid needs that needs the platform together, preventing them from tipping over. So these grids are made from 12-inch deep white flange members. It works like a giant brace frame, collecting seismic forces from each platform, and then it transfers it to the concrete base. These grids are made by units of diamond shaped frames, which has the dimensions of 4 by 7 feet, and they are oriented from 21 degrees to 45 degrees from horizontal and up to 84 feet in length.
Yeah. So there are various joineries used to create these grids. So there are like these large gusset plates used to connect the welded members, and as you can see, the half of the building planes are triple layered glass with an expanded metal mesh sandwiched between the two outer layers. This is to mainly create to reduce the heat and glare, because the facade is of glass, and to help to not overheat the building, the mesh and aluminum sheet metal is stretched. I'm sorry. Uh, which is why the mesh sandwich between the two outer layers.
So, in conclusion, Balmain solves any structural problem scientifically and yet manages not to lose out on the design aspect. Like for example, if we saw like most of his art structures and like his buildings, they are more similar and asymmetrical and more conventional notions of stability.
Cecil Belmont uses simpler and lesser known systems for solving complicated problems, like to how the transfer of lateral loads was done through the digrid system. He also uses a single module and repeats that same module in the building system, which in a very different way, which kind of helps him to create interesting structures. And his keen artistic sense helps to create architecture through structure. Like the structure itself kind of gives life to architecture. Thank you.
So Aishwarya, it was just you and Mansi, nobody else.
Oh no, Aditi was. I
Aditi
think
was
we have
also
similar voices. So
Acha, acha.
and Tejas
And
was, he got disconnected in the middle. We had to kind of take over his part also.
acha. But he couldn't rejoin, I think, na?
Yeah. He's done work though. He has done the work. Yeah.
Okay. What do you think about the kind of works that Cecil's works are they're very steel oriented, very chunky,
Yeah,
very
I think the main
large
material he uses are steel and glass.
glass.
he did try to kind of branch out to like when he kind of did collaborations with Shigeru Ban in the Met's Pompidou Center. He kind of tried to create the same kind of grid kind of thing with wood, but that was more like an experimental kind of a thing.
Hmm. Do you think his structures are more elegant or more provocative?
I think they're very bold and they want to kind of spark some kind of feelings in the user or the person who is looking at them. They look very unconventional. Like I will open this again. Like in this the ArcelorMittal orbit, it looks like this very unconventional mesh of like it almost looks like worms. It's kind of uncomfortable to look at, but at the same time you want to kind of slide down that large slide. Uh, at the same time, even the cantilever, you're almost afraid to stand underneath that overhang because it looks so heavy and chunky that you're almost sure it is going to fall on top of you. But then that's the beauty in his structure is that he is like it won't fall because he has made sure that it doesn't fall.
Yeah. Do you think his structure could be made more lightweight?
Because this is a skyscraper. Like I said, it is 243 meters tall. It is very large, and as you can see, the budget here was 800 million pounds. So, like I bet if he has used that much money, he has tried to kind of like cut back as much as he could and still kind of make the structure stable. So, I think this is the kind of best kind of possible outcome he could have gotten with like as lightweight as he could have made it, because as we said, he even used the transfer trusses to kind of not use it like it because it opens up so much space. It also kind of uh, because like these trusses, the material is being used only in those trusses. So the plans, like the plans in these towers, which mainly have like conference rooms and office blocks, they are open and like so even in that, he instead of having like beams and columns run here, he has like reduced as much material as he can. I think the form itself is very bold and like kind of overpowering in that way that we feel that the material used is a lot, but I feel he has tried to use as little as he could and still done and has achieved this.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else has any questions?
Everybody understood the system which he used? No one?
Yeah. Nobody has any questions. Okay, okay. Let's get somebody else. We have half an hour.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Who's the next group?
We are the next group. Aditya, May, Bhavika, and Neha.
Okay, go. First time, just tell your name when you come, when you speak. Okay, yeah.
Is that box? Yeah. I'm Fleur, and the names are here also. Anyway, I'm Fleur, and we will be presenting Frei Otto. Frei Otto was a German architect and structural engineer noted for his use of lightweight structures, in particular tensile and membrane structures. Next. He has a large body of work, and he has also worked with some other architects like Shigeru Ban. He was well known for his pioneering innovations, but shortly before his death in 2015, he was awarded the Pritzker Prize and many other rewards too. Much of his research in lightweight structures is as relevant today as when he first proposed them 60 years ago, and his work continues to inform architects and engineers to this day.
Hi, this is Neha. So he concerned himself with the idea of families growing and shrinking again, as a result of which he devoted himself into those endeavors to find solutions for mobility, growth, change, adaptability, and flexibility in expanding cities. He considered the principle of lightweight construction as a way of building with a minimal consumption of material, energies, and economic means. And the tents, the cable nets, the pneumatic structures, all of these, in his perspective, provided him with a means to reach this objective.
Hi, this is Bhavika. Otto's architecture method was highly inspired by nature. He had been interested in the fundamental aspect of the relation between architecture and nature and promoted alliance with ecology, sustainability, and the protection of natural resources. These principles form the backbone of his practice of creating spaces using minimal material, adaptability, and lightweight structures.
Yeah, it's Aditya. As a scientist, he spent a whole of his life studying the form finding process of nature. And as an architect, he used to use these processes to develop and build many structures. And these are constructions which reveal the process of creation with particular clarity. The form finding processes are those which give a specified set of conditions and following the prevailing laws of nature give rise to visible forms and construction under experimental conditions. And as they take place without human interventions, they are also termed autonomous formation processes. The architect Gunther so this is the Munich Olympic Stadium for 1972. Architect Gunther Bennis and Friotto was in charge for designing the stadium at Munich for the 1972 Olympics. The proposal focused on a continuous undulating translucent roof covering 80,000 square meter of landscape. What they did, they raised a lightweight structure where tensions are nullified by a system of supports and cables, and they used mathematical calculations based on computational procedures to determine the shape and behavior of the surface cover. And all the functions were conceived as a series of molded earth forms, which is covered by the lightweight umbrellas. The stadium, after the games get over, the whole imaginatively reclaimed airfield would be open to the public for everyday recreation. The roof of is considered a lightweight tensile and membrane construction, covered in acrylic glass panels and suspended membrane delicately floats above the stadium. For the stadium, the span was 10 times larger, which became a factor that presented Otto with major structural problems. But he found the solution and subdivided the circular roof into 9 sections, each measuring 80 meters long and 60 meters wide. And the 8 outer masts with edge cables holding the net together at each of 10 nodes. So basically, the cable nets formed the framework, which was pre-stressed, so to take the loads and then curved in opposite direction to be tensioned at right angles to the horizontal cables and giving it a saddle shape. Based on the concept of tensile, the mast and the cables are like the key structural components, and the saddle-shaped nets of 25 steel cables create a roof grid, and the saddles span up to 65 meter and reaches a maximum height of 58 meters. And the nets are supported by 8 tapering masts behind the stadium, ranging 50 meters to 70 meter in height. These are the structural components like the main. And the mast is the support. It supports the main cables and maintained in the tension by hanging the roof surfaces support, and it also transmit the loads to the foundation. The second is the cable net. They are like made of strands spaced 750 in both directions. Then the joints, the junction of various cables that make up the structural mesh is materialized by a knot of steel casting with the system using bolt anchors and tension. So this helps to transfer the load from the mast to the cable. Then the roof cover. It is made of acrylic panels laid on the cable net and bolted to the intersection nodes. The panels had flexibly connected to the net by supporting them on rubber buttons and then sealing the joints between panel with neoprene strips. So the cable are doubly curved and they result double curved saddle shape and which prevent the canopies easily from fluttering in the winds. So the total length of steel cables in the complex exceed 408 kilometers, and tension loads in the cables are net as much as 5,000 tons. So originally the foundation was intended to consist of pre-stressed anchors, but local code officials insisted that more conservative piers to provide stability. So in some cases, these piers are as much as 18 meters deep and 6 meter wide. So the construction details. So the foundation, the tension foundations were needed to anchor the main cables down to the earth, which had like the upward pulls of up to 50 meganewton, which is approximately 5,000 newton, which was exerted on such foundations. And three types of foundations were used, which were inclined slot foundation, the gravity anchor foundation, and deriving their anchoring effects from the self weight plus the weight of the soil surcharge. And the earth anchor foundation is 40 meters deep, which needed to support the mast. The cable nets and the joists. The net was formed from strands spun from 19 heavily galvanized steel wires with the lay of 10 times the lay diameter, and the main cable composed of five strands from between 37 and 109 wires each, and had to be held at high tension to control the deformation of the roof of the snow and wind load, and the edge cables vary in specifications. So this wire mesh is also held by straps that start from the head of the outer mast, and straps and cables anchored to the ground edge. And finally the acrylic cover with the neoprene. So the roof is covered with acrylic plexiglass transparent roofing, and it was formed by 29 by 29 2.9 by 2.9 meters of acrylic panels, and which had 4 of thickness, laid on the cable net and bolted to the intersection nodes. So to accommodate some of the movements, the footings of the mast consist of rubber bearing pads on concrete basis. So temporary steel balls were provided under the rubber pads to allow rotation during the assembly.
Another one of Otto's project was German Pavilion at the Expo 67. It was a collaboration with Rolf Gutbrod and was built in Montreal. This project acted as a turning point in his career since it brought his experiments with tensile structures to an international stage for the first time. It served as a potential for technological advancement, prefabrication, and mass production in the future of architecture. He believed that tensile tents promised a solution that was cheap, durable, and very versatile. He also preached that there was a need for temporary structures as they were easily assembled, taken down, and recycled. With few components, all of it could be adapted to any site or terrain. Next. Montreal experiences mild summers and harsh winters. The pavilion was a prefabricated structure. After manufacture, it was assembled on the site in 6 weeks and was dismantled after the fair. It is a landscape of hyperbolic paraboloid curves which show off the beauty of mathematical and physical relations of structures in the age where computer-generated solutions weren't available. The core structure is put together using suspension points and anchor joinery. Around the perimeter of the site, the tent dips to the ground and then rises around the masts. Next. The elements used in the structure are first the mast. The needle-like masts are hollow steel tubes which vary from 14 to 38 meters and are 8 in number. They taper towards the top. Then is the pre-stressed mesh cables which hold the mast and the net together. The roof, which is a pre-stressed textile membrane of 9,500 square meter, is a translucent weather skin made of PVC. This entire setup is held together by 31 anchor points around the periphery of the site. There are wind deflector glasses 2.25 meter high on all sides. Next. The process for construction was that first all the 8 masts were positioned and stabilized using brace cables 12 mm thick. Then the cable mesh were delivered in unit rolls of 9.5 meters and they were joined on the ground and pulled up to the masts. And on the exterior, they were attached to the anchor points using guy cables. The translucent PVC roof membrane was installed under the steel mesh by drawing them up piece by piece, and then it was pre-stressed with 102 to 153 kilogram force per meter. Next. Then these are a few pictures of the details used. First is the steel mesh cable. The joints, that is the thick cables, are 50 centimeter thick. The second picture shows the in-between mesh joints which are soldered and the anchor points between various pieces. Then the next picture shows the various meshes being joined together. Next. The first picture shows the plate which connects the mesh to the guy cables before they connect to the anchors. The next is all the holders used to connect the membrane to the mesh, and the next is the picture of the base of the mast of the ground. Next. This is a photo from the inside showing the loop joinery of the roof membrane to clip it onto the cable skeleton. Then these are the loops formed for opening at the top for ventilation. These are covered by aprons which are opened during the summers and closed during the winters to trap heat. Next. This is wind deflector glass. Then the mesh anchored to the guy cables and to the anchor at the bottom of the picture. Then this is a picture from the interior showing the mushroom-like skylights closed with aprons, and then how they are tied down to the base. Then there was a load test performed unintentionally when in winters the snow stayed on the roof and led to the breakage of some net cables which were getting connected to one of the masts, which tilted a bit and the net around it collapsed. Since the damage was small and localized, it was easy to repair and was done so using sliding cable clamps. Next. So these are two videos. The first one shows the development of roof membrane, and the second one is a GIF which shows the steps of assemblage of the pavilion that we have tried to show.
Now we'll be talking about his theories, all right, not a particular structure. In the space of only a few years, Fry Otto developed and built most of the important basic shapes of modern tent construction: the simple four, the point tent, the peak tents, the arch-supported tents, and the hump tents. He studied the physical laws of membrane surfaces and explored the fundamental possibilities of different construction methods. The crucial factors in tent construction are the shape of the membrane surface and the type of support. The shape of the membrane is the primary factor as it determines its action and the flow of the forces. In many of his experiments, he used soap film to create membrane surfaces in his models, like this one. The soap film forms a spatially curved surface that has specific physical and geometrical properties. The surface of the soap film is termed as a minimal surface as it encloses the smallest possible area within a closed space curve. Can you move to the next slide? Yeah. Some more information about soap films. The pre-stress tension surfaces have to adopt an equilibrium geometry in which the tensile forces in two directions are balanced, like an anti-cluster curve. The perfect resemblance of this is a soap film in which the surface tensions are the same in all the directions, but they are difficult to measure. This forms a minimal surface and it is a good starting point for the tension structure. Otto's modeling process would often start with soap film models and then move on to more robust stretch fabric models, from which he would develop the fabric patterns using strips of paper. Next. Uh, One of his tent structures are the hump tent. The hump tent is supported by one or more hump-like points. The high points can be formed by masts, which have either mushroom-shaped heads or heads with flexible laminae across which the membrane is stretched. This is a canopy of a cafe in Berlin, which has a star-shaped wooden leaf springs from the high points. Basically, this is how the support looks for the hump, for it to have a rounded edge. Yeah, next. The peak tent. The peak tent is supported by a mast at a single point within the membrane surface. The forces of the membrane are gathered along specific lines and then directed to the tip of the mast. This is done by the means of valleys reinforced by cables or straps. At the Swiss Regional Expo, the tent ensemble resembled a stylish alpine landscape. Next. The term membrane is generally used to describe a flexible and thin surface under tension. Mounted on simple supporting structures, membranes can be used to build tents. Tents are one of the earliest mobile and transportable shelters created by human beings. In his dissertation, The Suspended Roof, Fry Otto discovered the tent, formerly considered a temporary, humble, and rather unstable affair for architecture in the 1950s. This is one of his continuous membrane study drawings. Next. The point tent. Thanks to his development of membrane structures during the subsequent decades, this became an accepted efficient, high-quality form of construction. In the course of this, he noticed that membranes could not only be designed freely, but their shape evolved in an autonomous self-formation process within the given specifications. The 4-point tent has been explored digitally in this diagram in order to test its performance and to reach extreme conditions. Here, this is a sort of drawing to show how the anti-classic surfaces obtained, and this one, the orientation has been examined against the shade it produces in the given light conditions for 4-point tents. Next. Net structures. Cable nets are essentially subject to the same laws as membranes. However, the steel cables allow the construction of canopies with far greater spans than membranes. All the tent types can be also realized using cable nets instead of membranes. Unlike membranes, cable nets do not require a specific pattern to form anticlastic surfaces. When a net is stretched into a saddle shape, its square or rectangular meshes turn into diamond shapes. If it is possible to change the angles between the cables, the cable net can assume the shape of any surface which has a regular curvature. Thus, it is the edges alone that must be shaped. Next. Yeah, this is the net for the aviary in a zoo at Heilbronn, and the one on the top right is a model study for a rope cooling tower with a minimum surface area. In this in this model, it is very clear that, I mean, we can easily imagine how the soap model looked. Yeah. The minimum surface shape established itself in a soap film experiment depending on the diameter and the spacing of the rings. So if the rings had been any bigger, and the obviously the shape of the final thing would have changed. Yeah, next. Arches, walls, and shells. If we look at the right-hand side diagram, it is a model of the investigation of the load-bearing capacity for the Pantheon in Rome. Fry Otto developed a 2- and 3-dimensional suspension models and provided information about the distribution, size, and the course of the pressure forces. we try to make a model, but on this concept, but the string had a mind of its own, so it kind of got bunched up. But basically, what he's trying to, the principle is that when you suspend a string from one point to another, it forms a curve, and if you suspend many of them in with their ends at the diameter of a circle, you get a dome. This would be the most ideal dome given the like the base diameter and the um length of the string, and this should be used in construction because the forces would be um, resolved in the best way. Next. Oh, by the way, I was Flo. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so I'm Neha. So the frame structures was another one of his principles or disciplines of construction. We did a little experiment with the balloon and the nails to show the same. I'll explain it. It works on a very simple principle where imagine you're trying to support a very thin, flexible or a stretchable membrane on a slender supporting column. So what will happen eventually is that the tip of the vertical element will pierce through the tend material. Instead, what he did is that he divided the tip into many different components. So the load concentration is distributed over many points and then finally transferred to the principal component. Next slide. Yeah, so the hump tent from the 1957 exhibition, as explained by Fleur in the earlier slide, it works on the same principle. What is important to note here is that the point of connection where the individual component meets the surface of the membrane needs to be reinforced to increase and strengthen the effective area of contact. Sorry, next slide. Here we tried breaking down and resolving one of his works in the form of a GIF. It's the Mechenwerk Bridge from 2002. So solid rods fan out from reinforced concrete bases and carry the bridge platforms. Hence, a planar mesh is formed by the fanned out compression bars in combination with horizontal tension bars. This fulfills a load-bearing function as well as serving as side rails enclosing the bridge. And the fans also intersect between the bridge bases to stabilize each other. These were some other examples. Aditya, next slide. Sorry. Yeah, so these were a series of branch structures with respect to the rotation angles. So on the picture to the left, we see, so the first column is the plan, the second column is elevation, and third again elevation. So the first two columns show when the rotation angle is 15 degree, the amount of generation of branches, and when the angle is 45, the lesser amount or the expansive branch generation. Aditya, can you go to the next slide? Here it is visualized in a more powerful sense. So again, analysis of rotation degree of the angles against the generation level of the branches, right from 15 degrees Celsius to 15 degrees, sorry, to 19 degrees. Next slide. Next slide. No, next, Aditya. The pneumatic structures. Yeah, so the next is the pneumatic structure. So they are highly different than membranes whose shapes are predefined and characterized by anticlastic curvature. So basically, I think these are the ones that have equidirectional surface curvature as their defining element. And then next. Yeah, so he tried creative mediums to model the structures. For instance, he did use soap bubbles as explained by Fleur earlier. Can you play that video once? We also tried, because we were having fun with soap bubbles. We also tried one where there are these hemispherical surfaces within inside, one inside the other, where an equal internal pressure is maintained. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, so this one is a quite famous example, dipping the cloth in plaster solutions and hanging it upside down, and then waiting till it naturally acquires a shape, and then inverting it to determine the exact shape of the domed surface structures in its best possible manner. We did try some on the pictures on the right with the rice water, since we didn't have plaster at home. Next. So next is the convertible constructions. His experiments with these convertible constructions range right from simple awnings to relatively complex domes. One important thing he stated was that these developments make it possible to realize that buildings are there only when they are needed. Next slide. So next was the umbrella. It is, I think, the oldest type of convertible roof construction.
Neha, are you there?
I think one of you can continue.
So, in this case, Flyoto explored many various concepts, including a centrally gathered tented membrane, which was ultimately implemented. Its pleats and folds were determined with the help of a physical movable model and then carried out. Yeah, next. These are examples of convertible structures and the analysis of convertible roof structures with respect to the different divisions. Next. This is a model that we had made to try to make a convertible roof structure on the right, where yeah. So on the left you can see making of a physical model of the convertible tent. The fabric is being held along the axis through some links. Each of the endings are attached to the strings, which when make the fabric fold. So yeah. Next. And this is the convertible structure filled with umbrellas. He created weather protection umbrellas for Pink Floyd's concert tour. Very cool. And sorry, the supporting structure lies above the umbrella membrane and creates a funnel shape, allowing the rainwater to flow down through the mast. This is similar to the technique used in I forgot what it's called. The Crystal Palace. Yeah. To open the umbrella to open the umbrella, an electric spindle at the foot of the mast pulls the top of the mast telescopically down. The elements of the arms and struts allow the ends of the cantilevered arms to lift, thereby causing the membrane of thin fabric to tauten under the arms. The process takes about 2.5 minutes either way. Next, the bibliography. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, any questions? Aishwarya, Rutik, you guys can ask questions too.
Are you all here? Anyone?
Okay, Fleur, my question to you is, if it is so lightweight and if it's so easy and if it's it was designed in the ages, like, it's been around for 40, 50, 60 years now. Why is it not very popular in India? Not one single structure of this kind is there, right?
Yeah.
Besides the entrance to the mall or something like that, not one. Why so?
I think skilled labor could be another reason, maybe.
And weather also. We have a lot
Why?
of rain.
What about the? But you have awnings. You have PVC fabric. You have all kinds of things that sort of helps in. I mean, those places they have snow. So in those places when they have snow, it's more load concentric. Snow is heavier than rain, so skilled labor, yeah, I that's one one thing. Skilled labor is one thing that, but I also feel that, skilled labor is not something that you cannot either import or generate within your ecosystem. So it's very well something that you can do, isn't it? If you have I mean, we are building tall towers here, so why not? Why not something like this?
If we see in India, still we like a temporal structure. Still, people are mostly using, even for expos and all. Now, since past 4 5 years, I guess people are trying new concepts and ideas. But otherwise, if you see for a larger gathering or something, the type of structure which we are creating, still, I mean, that can be, of course, developed on this line.
Yeah, I was actually thinking whether it's the lack of imagination or lack of wanting to do experiments with different kinds of structures that has made us sort of stuck in the past. Does anybody think like that?
Maybe it's more expensive because now we use like the normal trabeated system for like Ganpati pandals and just put a cloth over it. So I think that is less expensive than like this, especially if it's for a temporary structure. Maybe.
Yeah, but of course ETFE membranes are expensive, but the rest of the things that you use is not very expensive. You're actually using, zero. I think it's just 0.1% of what material you would have otherwise used as construction. So I think you are ending up using, just 0.1% of the material, which is, you have tall structures which are heavily reinforced and so much amount of steel and everything. I don't think there is a shortage of material. I think it is. I mean, just travel to Worli or Lower Parel. You will see all kinds of fancy structures there. Um, and consultants from all over the world are working on those kinds of projects. So I don't I wouldn't take that as there's a possible answer actually. Anybody else has any question?
I also had a comment on that. Like in India, the population is like that much that we don't give that much amount of like area or importance to the recreational areas, which could like improve the like the value of any place, and we like mostly give importance to the residential part of the nation. So that could be a one reason.
You mean to say that there is less amount of funding maybe on sports and stadiums and
For the awareness maybe in people that for the recreational spaces that are made, and even they are made now they are made of like steel decking or something. The people are not aware of the uh, material maybe.
Yeah, but then who will make them aware? The people, the common janta is not going to come up and ask an architect and say that, okay, I want a steel structure here or I want a, pneumatic structure here. Who is the one who needs to introduce them? The people who will, who's the one who's supposed to be holding the hands and taking them to this a new paradigm, right? Who's the one who needs to do that?
Yeah, we architects only, engineers and architects.
Yeah, I think see the in my opinion the major bottleneck is the funding of the projects and the general attitude towards wanting to take risk is a general problem. But the funding of these things and risk in the and wanting to make risky investments comes really from government institutions. If you look at government institutions, they are the one who needs to sponsor. I mean, who is going to privately build a stadium? The stadium is going to be owned by a confederation or a committee or the government or the state government or whatever, right? So if they don't produce those kinds of innovative inclination, then we end up with heavy RCC concrete thing. So that is one angle towards it, but there is hardly anybody else who is doing. अगर देखोगे तो पता चलेगा ना, मेनू कार्ड में ऑफर ही नहीं किया तो कहाँ से कोई देगा? You can't go to an Udupi restaurant and start asking for pasta. It has to be there in the menu card. If it's not there, then how will somebody else begin to offer? So I think there is a lack of imagination also, and wanting to take risk in the kind of architecture that we have around. Look at a city like Mumbai. If you just drive around, you will see how depressing our skyline is, right? And if you just go around, there are certain good structures around, but we are in this world where we where we have materials of different kinds, we have technology of different kinds, we have technologies to manipulate the efficiency and stuff like that, but we don't use any of those. But anyhow, yeah, time is 4:40. If nobody has any other comments or questions, we can wrap it up. आज हमने खाली 3 किया है, तो we are going very slow.
Guys, I hope you all liked this presentation which we did with these examples and these architects. Because no questions are coming, if no comments, not your views are coming. So like, I am a bit confused. I mean, anyway. So yeah, if it's done, yeah, we can leave. And next week again, a day before, I'll let you guys know who will be presenting.
Okay, ठीक है. All right.
Sure. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.